The first moment I stepped into the college, I was approached and handed a card to see if I wanted to vote for a union. And I said, unions? Isn't unions are democracy at the workplace, aren't they? And he said, yeah, of course, that's the problem. We need more democracy at the workplace. So I said, oh, sure, I believe in the Constitution, the right to organize, and I'll sign this card. So I signed it.
While the Wiseman case and the tenor of the times had planted the seeds of confrontation between the faculty and administration, specific events during Leo Redfern's presidency led to actual organization, and the battle for faculty unionization was on. In the late 1970s, Bill Sullivan served as faculty union president.
Professors coming out at that point were coming out of the 60s, and a pretty radical moment in American history. For the first time, I think working class people were becoming professors. And so there was a kind of a blue-collar tinge, if you will, to the faculty at that point, and a willingness to consider such things as unionization.
The most contentious of these issues was that of the absence of due process. The Faculty Appeals Committee would confront the administration on a number of faculty complaints, virtually all of which were summarily rejected by the administration, or more often, were not responded to at all.
The college was firing people, not even using their own guidelines. Mass resignation of the Faculty Welfare Committee of the College Senate, which I think was a company union, never had any power. And so I think that the signals were there that there were some real problems at the institution.
The first vote in April 1977 ended in a majority voting for a union, although there was no majority for any of the three bargaining agents represented. William Sullivan, Sherry Beauvenet, Harold Nugent, and many others worked hard to settle on the National Education Association as the bargaining agent. In the runoff vote on May 12th, the NEA won by a razor-thin 62-60 vote. On February 24, 1978, referred to as Black Friday by the faculty, they learned that the Board of Trustees had abolished the position of department chairs, creating a three-divisional dean system. The trustees also imposed a freeze on faculty salaries, sabbaticals, promotion, and tenure, which was to last 2 years. These actions were seen by the faculty as so punitive that they actually converted more faculty to unionize. When the final vote in support of unionization was taken on January 25, 1979, the vote that day was 66 to 57. The first contract was signed in March of 1980. However, the struggles continued.
So between 1979, January 79, and probably 1981, January 1981, they just met with us, but just rejected, as far as I could tell. And so negotiations weren't going anywhere.
Stating that the academic world is no longer exciting, and feeling hamstrung by a growing bureaucracy at all levels, Leo Redfern resigned in the summer of 1979. Barbara Seeley would arrive in the fall of 1980 into a maelstrom of unresolved issues surrounding unionization and fiscal cutbacks by the legislature. In 1982, the trustees not only refused a faculty salary increase, but also rolled back the 9% raise that the faculty had achieved the previous year. Black armbands, buttons, and signs calling on the trustees to honor the contract, or proclaiming that no contract is no solution, were commonplace on campus for several years. Edith Notman was president of the union during this period. Students, siding with the faculty, marched and picketed with their professors.
The relationship that developed out of the union situation was sort of symbolic of the relationship that developed with the students in the 70s. There wasn't that distinction, there wasn't that gap between the professors and the students, and somehow that started to disappear. And we didn't see ourselves as totally separate, we saw ourselves on the same side.
Picketing occurred several times a week during the fall of 1982, as the trustees continued to summarily reject fact-finding reports.
At some point, I don't know quite why, but the Board of Trustees decided to turn away from that strategy. Perhaps Governor Garland played a role in that. Perhaps they saw that the institution was not going to advance until they resolved this problem.
Under Edith Notman's leadership, and in face-to-face debates with President Seeley and Dick Gustafson, Vice President for Academic Affairs, the tide turned, and on October 29th, the trustees ratified the second contract.
And it took until about the late 90s before I think the institution, the university system said, okay, we're not going to fight you anymore. And of course that was after 8 years of pretty good relationship, not 8 years, after 6 years of good relationship in terms of mutual gains bargaining, which began in 1994.
I was president at a perfect time for me to be president, just as I think Bill Sullivan was president at a perfect time for somebody like Bill. And not all the union presidents were that fortunate.
My colleagues here at Keene State College were feisty. They couldn't be kicked around.
Yeah, I think we were a feisty faculty, but we were a faculty that really cared about the good of the institution. And I think the unionization was part of that, caring about the greater good.
The challenge to administrative prerogative with the most residents, however, was the suit brought against the college by Dr. Christine Sweeney. It was ultimately to reach the Supreme Court of the United States and has become the standard case study of sexual discrimination in higher education. Dr. Sweeney was a 1943 graduate of Keene Teachers College and had obtained her doctorate from Catholic University when she returned to teach at Keene State in 1969. Granted tenure in 1972, she would be denied promotion to full professor twice by 2 all-male faculty evaluation and advisory committees, while junior male counterparts, without the terminal degree, were granted promotions to higher salary levels. The Manchester Union Leader, the only statewide newspaper in New Hampshire, began to publish the salary schedule of the university system faculty.
Well, there were very few women faculty members, and it was the first time that I had access to any or knowledge of anyone else's salary. And when I saw mine in comparison with the others, I saw red. I came to Keene State as an experienced teacher. I had taught at the elementary level, I had taught through grade 8, then I had taught at the university.
In that same year, Sweeney would file charges of sex discrimination with the New Hampshire Commission of Human Rights and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and 2 years later would bring suit against the college under Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, the Equal Pay Act of 1963, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Although finally granted promotion in 1976, the Supreme Court remanded her case back to the United States Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston. In 1979, the college lost its final appeal.
And yet the judge did find that there was discrimination, and the judge found that there was a pattern of discrimination against all of the women at the college. And that led in turn to the unions looking at the ways in which people were first appointed at the college and subsequent promotions, and whether or not there was a pattern of discrimination that existed there. And so I think the Sweeney case was part of that reform as well as the union movement.
Dr. Sweeney was to remain at Keene State, retiring in 1992, and in 2003 was honored with Keene State College's President's Award for Outstanding Women of New Hampshire.
I think she was really touched by getting that award. I think that was quite important to her, that people finally were acknowledging that she had done something extraordinary, and she did.
This atmosphere of confrontation between faculty and administration would essentially determine the character of Dr. Seeley's presidency.
Keene State was the bad boy of the system. Unionizing, raising problems, getting, some thought, presidents fired. Yes, we were the bad boy.
Despite dramatic positive growth in the college's academic programs and the increasing prestige of the institution as a liberal arts college, President Seeley was to be increasingly isolated by the conflicts, both on campus and in Concord, which surrounded her. She resigned in the spring of 1986. However, the late 1970s and early 1980s were a period of considerable innovation and creativity. The expansion of the library, the burgeoning of the visual and performing arts, the success of the athletic programs. Programs that had been started during the normal school period were revived, revamped, and expanded, many by those faculty members who arrived at the end of the 1960s through the mid-1970s. Safety studies had been part of the curriculum as early as 1935 and expanded in 1942. In 1974, with the assistance of grant funding, Richard DeSantis created the Safety Center, which would grow into occupational safety, and later, the Technology, Design, and Safety Studies programs. Sports had always been a part of the college culture, from the red and white women's intramural teams of its first decade to Mason's formation of men's basketball and football teams in the 1920s and 1930s. Title IX in 1972 literally leveled the playing field as women's sports began to flourish across the nation. Keene State College, however, had already made advances in women's sports early in the 1970s. In 1976, the Child Development Center was founded. This was a natural outgrowth of the home economics studies that were part of the institution's curriculum from its earliest years. The CDC continues to offer an atmosphere in which preschool children are nurtured and taught. In 1983, sociology professor Charles Hildebrandt founded a Holocaust Resource Center that was to grow into the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, with the college's first endowed faculty chair and the first in the nation undergraduate major in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. The center is now an internationally recognized institute for Holocaust research. David White, professor of education, organized the first Children's Literature Festival in 1977. This event has gained international recognition, with world-famous authors of children's literature visiting the campus for this annual event. International educational opportunities for students and faculty alike grew significantly through the late 1980s, from the inception in the early 1970s of a single exchange partnership in teacher education and English with Derby Polytechnic in England. the Fine Arts Center on Brickyard Pond, to be renamed the Leo Redfern Arts Center, had opened its doors in 1980 with 2 professional theaters, art and music facilities, and a dance studio. Within the first year of its opening, the facility began to present cultural events to the greater regional community. With the addition of the Putnam Arts Lecture Hall in 1986, funded by the Putnam Foundation, art history and film studies were able to exploit state-of-the-art audio-visual technology, with lectures and film series available to the people of the region. In recognition of the quality of the newly created management program, the college was named a Small Business Institute. From initiatives begun in the English department, American Studies and Women's Studies have flourished, along with communication, philosophy, theater, dance, and American Indian Studies. Film Studies, begun in the early 1970s, expanding into production in the mid-1980s, has grown into a program with over 140 majors. From the turmoil and creativity of the previous 20 years emerged the elements that would create a diversified, agile, public liberal arts institution.